A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the beginner's guide to buying a sailboat, and the first 2 points were about weight and draft. And I asked you to figure out what you wanted to do with the boat, and then pick a keel that would best suit you. And you asked a lot of great questions, so today we're going to dive into the depth of it. This week on Everything You Need to Know, which keel is worse? You might be wondering why this episode isn't called Which Keel is Best, and there's two reasons for that. First, with all things on boats and honestly in life, everything is a compromise. There's no perfect keel. Deeper usually means faster, but then you can't dock the boat in shallow harbors. Longer and heavier usually means safer, but then the boat sails like a bathtub full of Volkswagens. The second reason it's called the worst keel is genuinely because YouTube videos get more views with a negative title. Don't blame me, you clicked this. It can be hard to pick a keel because it's extremely complicated and there's so many options, but as with everything on this channel, we're gonna make it easier. Easier than falling off a log. We're gonna break down your choices to 3 main keel types, and the first one we're gonna talk about today is the fin keel. You'll find this bad boy on just about every lake boat and almost certainly on every race boat you see. Before we go down the rabbit hole here, consider this. You likely already think about the aerodynamic properties of a sailboat, how the wind interacts with the sails to propel the boat forward, but you also have to think about the hydrodynamic properties, how the keel, and lesser so the rudder, travel through the water. A fin keel is designed to get the weight down low and to counter the force of the wind on the sails, but also to travel through the water like the blade of a knife. It's super thin, as deep as it reasonably can be, and fore and aft is very short. Now, all this means that the fin keel counters the sails with weight, and it cuts through the water like a knife. It creates its own lift, sucking the boat forward, but doing all that with minimum wetted surface. These keels are the sports cars of the keel game. They're fast, they're deep, they're maneuverable, and also more inclined to sail almost straight into the wind. When you're out for a sail that involves going from point A to point B, as you would usually be doing while cruising, you're trying to get somewhere. So you can almost guarantee that the wind will be coming from exactly where you're trying to go. That's how sailing works. A deep fin can point higher into that wind and thus get you there more directly instead of having to run off by 45 degrees tacking all over the lake. But the sports car of the keels has problems. Actually, it's got a bunch of them. These fin keels are so small fore and aft and so thin that to get the weight down as low as they can possibly get it, to counter the force of the sails, they need to be very deep, sometimes as much as 10 feet deep. And that's all fine and good when you're out in the middle of the ocean, but what about when you get to the islands? Anchoring the boat in paradise is usually in the shallow water where the protected anchorages are, where you want to be when a storm comes. And it's usually harder to get into by nature because it's fairly shallow. Your friends on the 5-foot draft boat might get there 2 hours after you because you're so fast. But they can go in an anchor while you have to find somewhere else to keep your boat, usually less protected, somewhere the boat will fit. The other major problem with the fin keel is comfort. When you're going fast and white-knuckling it, you might not be too worried about comfort. But the sports car doesn't do much for a stable ride. They tend to hobby horse more when they're at anchor. They tend to heel over more as they sail. They are what a lot of sailors call more tender, more touchy to changes in the wind. Also, a fin keel has a very small cross-section where it meets the hull, so if you ground it hard enough, it's going to be a lot more susceptible to damage at the keel bolts, or in many European designs, the keel matrix that supports the keel inside the hull. On the race course, the sports car makes a lot of sense, but when you get to where you're going and you need to sleep at night, you can't help but to feel a little bit silly. So you might be thinking, I don't need a sports car, Tim. I don't much care how high I can point or how fast I get there. I just want to get there safely and comfortably. Which keel is that? The answer is, of course, a big monster of a full keel. We're going to focus mainly on Island Packet here because they do such a great job of these, but a lot of boats come with full keels, and with the age of most of them, you can get one pretty cheap. We were looking at one on a consult yesterday, an Alberg 37 for 20 grand down in La Paz. That's cheap. This is the keel that runs more than 50% of the length of the boat and usually starts just ahead of the mast, and these specialize in getting the most weight under you as they can. In this Alberg's case, 6,500 pounds of dead weight, as low as it can be. So if the fin keel was the sports car of the keels, then this is a full-size Suburban, big and heavy and willing to smash through anything that gets in its way. Island Packets are well known for their blue water pedigree, crossing oceans and weathering huge storms, and always getting you there safely. They're also a lot more comfortable because of that long weight underneath you. They don't tend to bounce around at anchor, and the motion of the boat, even under rough conditions, is a lot more friendly to those that might be prone to seasickness. That massive keel also provides a lot of protection from sliding sideways while sailing, and boats like these sail like a freight train. On lighter boats, as you sail upwind, usually into the waves slow you down as the boat struggles to plow through them. But a monster-heavy full keel usually just smashes the waves out of the way with very little effort. I've been out on an Endeavour 37 in 20 to 25 knots of wind, and to be honest, we couldn't even tell it was that windy or wavy. The slow and steady motion of a full keel boat is so much easier to live with than any other kind of keel. Also going for the full keel is that they're encapsulated, meaning the keel is part of the hull and laid up hollow as they're building the boat, and then filled with the ballast after the fact. So if you wanted to, you could run these things aground at full steam as many times as you desired without ever really having to worry about damaging those pesky keel bolts or the keel matrix. The length of the keel also means that there's a lot of room for weight down low, and it doesn't have to be that deep. Island Packets are famous for anchoring in the Florida Keys or the Bahamas because most of them only need 4 or 5 feet of water. The downsides here might already seem obvious. All of that heavy, massive, long keel means a lot of wetted surface to drag through the water with you, and that means it's less efficient. And when we're going to be powered by the wind, efficiency is kind of the name of the game. While the fin keel boat might be clipping along very happily at 7 knots, in the same wind and conditions, the Island Packet is going to struggle along at around 5 knots. It's just less efficient through the water, but it'll handle bigger winds and rougher conditions than anything else. Maneuverability takes a big hit too with that full keel because while they love to go straight, and they're very good at that, they don't like to turn and typically are very hard to back up in tight quarters. A good fin keel boat will usually spin around on its own axis in the marina while maneuvering, where the Island Packet might need 2 or 3 times its own length just to turn around. Lady K Sailing is brought to you by patrons, people who give a couple of bucks an episode to make these videos possible. I really couldn't do it without you. The mission of Lady K has always been to get more people sailing more easily. If you'd like to help out, please consider becoming a patron. So what if the sports car of the keels isn't exactly your flavor, and a full-on Suburban is just way more than you need with too many compromises to performance and efficiency? Is there a meet halfway compromise between these two polar opposites? Can we get the shallow depth we need, some of the weight and length of the full keel to stay safe and comfortable, but also get some of the performance and efficiency of the racier fin keel? Is there something between the sports car and the Suburban, something like a crossover, fairly good at most things, but not really great at any one thing? Well, it turns out that there is. While full keels were basically every major design in the 1940s and 50s, where the Alberg comes from, and fin keels were all the rage in racing, we started to see a compromise around the 1970s, and most people call it the modified fin. This is basically a racy fin keel stretched a little bit longer, fore and aft, made thicker and shorter to allow for shallower water. Some even are what's called a sheen keel that gets fatter toward the bottom. These don't have the same high aspect lift properties hydrodynamically as a fin keel, but they aren't a bathtub full of old Volkswagens either. They're sort of in the middle. The keel on Lady K is just such a little crossover style of keel. It's longer fore and aft than the optional fin keel that boat could have come with, but only needs 5 feet of water, and it's a bit thicker than it would have been. Now, this keel isn't fantastic at crossing oceans or weathering hurricanes. Ask me how I know. But it is adequate at those things. It doesn't point as high as a lot of the other boats that I race against, but it isn't terrible either. It doesn't turn on its own axis like the Olsen 30 I sometimes race on, but it doesn't need 3 times the boat's length to spin around either. It's just middle of the road. It's not bad at anything, and it's not perfect at anything either. Which is sort of the nature with most boats. Everything in boating is a compromise, and this is the compromise keel. It just gets the job done. When we look at all the newer boats coming out now, too, even for the last 20 years, this keel is kind of all the rage. Likely of the monohulls, about 75% of the boats you'll find plying around the Caribbean waters every winter are some variant of the modified fin, and manufacturers have made it even better in more recent years. Because the modified fin is shorter fore and aft than a full keel, and also shorter in depth than a fin keel, we needed to find a way to get more weight on it as low as possible. So manufacturers started to add a bulb at the bottom, like the shape of a torpedo. And to add some hydrodynamic properties to that torpedo bulb thing, we even started to see people add wings to them. Often this is called the fin with bulb, and it allows us to keep the depth to a more reasonable 5 or so feet, but the weight of the keel fairly high for that comfort and safety that you want. When we look at all the major manufacturers today like Benz and Jens and Hunters and Catalinas, they all offer around a 5-foot keel option with the bulb at the bottom, and for good reason. It's the same reason that there are more crossover vehicles on the road now than anything else. It just works for everything. A quick reminder, though, that while we're on the subject, when you read the ad for a boat for sale, remember that the broker usually takes the specs of the boat right from the Sailboat Data website, and on that site, they always list the keel depth as the maximum keel that the boat came with from the factory. Most will say 6 or 7 feet, but most of those boats weren't ordered with that biggest keel. They were usually ordered with the modified fin of about 5 feet. Some of the biggest ocean crossers that we love to watch every day on YouTube are this keel arrangement. Look at Delos, for example, a modified fin. It's just a bigger and heavier and beefier version of that design. But that boat has crossed every ocean she can get her hands on, and the keel has always delivered and performed very well. If my boat is a crossover, then Delos would be a full-on SUV. Real quick, if you like this video, please take a second to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Both of those things are free for you and would really mean the world to me. With whatever your keel choice and boat choice for that matter, it is critical that you, as a captain, adapt your thinking and your decision making to the situation. I know my modified fin isn't an island packet. She weighs 15,000 pounds, not 40,000. And I make decisions accordingly. I weigh the weather forecast carefully before making miles or leaving a safe harbor. I restrict myself to what I feel my boat, my crew, and myself as a captain are capable of. When I'm on an even lighter boat, I again adapt my decisions. If you decide to go the route of a sub 20,000 pound boat for your Caribbean adventure or any adventure like most people do, respect the boat and the weather. These boats can do just about anything, but they can't do it any time. There's a right time for a lighter boat. Crossing the Gulf Stream, for example. If you're on a 15,000 pound boat, you don't do it when there's any northerly component to the wind. You even wait a whole day after a northerly component for the Gulf Stream to calm down. But if you're worried about it, and you want the luxury of not having to worry about it, just buy an Island Packet 440. If you need help with your boat shopping adventure and you want to book an hour of my time, head on over to ladyksailing.com/consults. I'd also like to invite you to come and hang out with us on the Lady K Discord server, where a bunch of us sailors just talk about boats all day. I'll leave a link below. Until next week, guys, keep the heavy side down, but not too far down. We'll see ya.